I don't know. I have no idea when it really started. The official start of it was the week Sputnik flew. And there are a large group. The Air Force had a project. You see, the Air Force, we had the research airplane projects there that we'd come up with ideas, and like Max says, toys we want to play with, and we'd get the Air Force to fund them and build them, you see, and the Air Force would look for something past the X-15, and they weren't quite sure what they wanted to do. I think Benny Schriever had the idea for a big space WPA program there that where he was going to have observation satellites or surveillance satellites constantly flying around the Earth looking at things. And it's rather interesting where that grew out of. That grew out of the V2 work in Peenemünde, actually. It turns out that Von Braun's boss was a guy named Walter Dornberger, and he was a general, one of Hitler's generals. And Walter had proposed to build, I forget what it was, either A4 or A10, and that was supposed to be able to bomb New York from Berlin, actually. It was going to be a great big winged V2 that would glide in, you see. And the Army got hold of von Braun, and the Air Force wasn't a private separate branch of the service, but it became a separate branch of the service, and here's all these Germans building all these things in competition with their bomber airplanes, you see, and they didn't particularly like that. So I think they engaged in what I call one-upsmanship and brought Von Braun's boss over here, and he was also a PhD engineer, a real great guy, in fact. And the Air Force sponsored two very top-secret studies at that time called Robo and Brass Bell. One of them was more interested in the structure and the design of the spacecraft, and the other was interested in the aerodynamics and other things. And, the Air Force was proposing to do some of these things, but they weren't sure about the technical feasibility of it. So they asked the NACA to convene a group of people out at Ames in October of 1957. And I think we were out there the week Sputnik flew. But we had Gilruth wasn't there. He was off in Europe somewhere. I believe Floyd Thompson was there. And me and Max, Paul Purser, Walt Williams, who was running, Ed was at the time, Neil Armstrong, a young X-15 test pilot, was there, Dee Beeler, Al Eggers, Harvey Allen, the guys who came up with the ballistic, blunt body ballistic missile nose cone reentry thing, which is I don't know all the other folks there. Adolf Busemann, a German supersonic scientist that we got from Germany right after the war. And we all took a look at this quote thing. It eventually became dinosaurs, what the thing became, but we all took a look at it, and our conclusion was it doesn't violate any of the laws of nature as we know them, you know, but there's an awful lot of tough engineering problems we have to solve. And Max and Al Eggers started kicking around the idea of putting a man in space. There'd been some talk about it, in fact, quite a bit of talk about it before that time, in fact. And they had arguments whether it ought to have wings or what shape it ought to look like. And I guess I wanted to do what they call a scout program there. I had ideas about the Vanguard was the only authorized satellite launching program we had, and it wasn't doing too well at the time. And I wanted to do the scout. I'd been to Denver in July of that year, and one of these SPIA conferences I'm talking about, and Aerojet was building a 40-inch diameter rocket, solid rocket, which was known as the Jupiter Junior. It was something for the Navy, basically, and it would be launched either from a ship, an aircraft carrier, or else they'd put it down where it floated down in the water and launch it directly out of the water. And then Thiokol had been building a rocket called the Hermes, with a 31-inch diameter rocket. And then Grand Central Rocket Company was building the Meteor, which was the top stage of the Vanguard. And it didn't take very long. I got home and I started doing a few calculations on this. And I had 3 stages, and I found out that just through not serendipity or whatever you want to call it, but I found out that if you took the 40-inch and the 31-inch and put them as first and second stage, and you made a 4th stage out of that one, that you could design a 3rd stage where all of them were almost ideally matched, where that you had a constant mass, constant velocity per stage, and a constant mass fraction per stage, which is almost a perfect match. And decided that, hey, that would make an ideal way of putting something in orbit, you see. And it'd be a real cheap way, because I already had 3 stages pretty much well developed. I only had to develop the other stage. And we kicked that around with Dr. Dryden, and we were told, no, the Navy's the only one. Eisenhower said the Navy's the only one going to put a satellite in orbit. Well, of course, they did, and they let von Braun put it up. By the way, using 2 stages of solid rockets as the upper stage, too. And those little rockets that I had developed, too, by the way, they were T-55s, actually. They were done by Zarkov. And so we couldn't do Scout. Well, we went back and we started working on Scout. And Max wanted to talk to him about putting a man in orbit, and he made his classical statement that kind of almost cost him being head of NASA. That's the kind of, it's like shooting a girl out of a cannon, you know, and that almost crucified him for the rest of his life when he said that. It came to haunt him any number of times. So Max decided, well, we're going to put a man in space, and we went back and started quote bootlegging that thing from that point on, you see. And the other thing is that after that time, Eisenhower someone had decided they wanted a space agency in response to Sputnik, you see, and they had to choose some outfit that's going to kind of be the nucleus of it. Well, they happened to pick the NACA as the nucleus of it, and I'm convinced that most of the reason for that is that the ones who are really space people were the guys in PARD who were going up in hundreds of miles up into space and getting some very, very high velocities with simple launch vehicles and doing a lot of work like that. So we Gus Crowley decided that what he wanted to do is someone got wind of the fact that we might be the nucleus of the space age. I'm not sure what, but in March of 1958, they formed a little committee to study the NACA's role in space for budget purposes, you see. And that we met, I think, first meeting at Langley. But later on, well, then they made it a permanent group, and we met up in Washington from about April almost through October. We spent 4 days a week up in Washington, 4 to 5 days a week up in Washington, trying to work out what the NACA would do in space, you see, what programs we do and budget for them. And we got people from Lewis, some people from Lewis. Ames was pretty far out. They didn't send very, they had a guy assigned, but he didn't come out and stay with us the whole time. We worked up the NACA's program. Well, we also went through the Pentagon and the DOD like we owned the place. You know, we could attend every top secret meeting they had. We had a list of those. We'd go to them and go to the Atomic Energy Commission to see what was going on, what these people were thinking about in space. That the idea that maybe if since they were not going to be part of it, that we'd bring those programs into the new NASA organization, although we didn't know it was going to be NASA at the time. So we did that. Well, Max and Eggers are the ones who kicked this around, you know, putting a man in orbit. There'd been some things going on, actually, in the country. We had a delegate to it, a guy named Bill O'Sullivan, and they all swore to secrecy, and Bill wouldn't say anything about it, but Al kind of got fed up with it and started kicking this thing around with Max and telling Max what they'd been looking at. And we got the idea, hey, the Russians, you put a man up, you know, if we're going to put a man up, we got to try to beat him since they put this thing in orbit. And we went back, and Max started quote bootlegging, you know, doing something without asking authorization for it, like we always did anyway. And we were doing that back at home, and we were bootlegger, taking a look at all the concepts of the Scout, kind of formulating what the thing would look like, what type of control system it would have, and about how much we'd want to put in, you know, thought we'd put in orbit, and about how much it would cost, doing that type of planning. And we started doing planning for what eventually became the Mercury program. But during this time frame, Max and I and Paul Purser and Bill O'Sullivan, Bob Gilruth were on this committee that, you see, one little division constituted at least a third of the committee, actually, for some reason or other. And we were going through the Pentagon, finding out what went on in DOD that related to space, with the idea that if they weren't going to be allowed to do it, we'd pick those things up. Well, there are a lot of things in military space they were going to keep, actually, but at least the space program per se was Eisenhower determined was going to be strictly a civilian organization. And we came up with the idea budget. Pretty soon we realized suddenly that we were going to be it, you know, that there wasn't going to be anybody else in space, so that this was going to be the space agency. And we kind of finalized what we wanted to do. I wanted to do Scout, we wanted to do Mercury, I wanted to do big solid rockets. They had some big liquid rockets there, one of which became the F-1, was the E-1 program. Del Tischler from Washington was the guy who was looking after the liquids. I was looking out after solids at that time. Well, the thing I didn't say, well, this is coming on later anyway. We started doing all this work back at Langley. We'd come back at Langley and kick things around, you know. We'd leave instructions for the people back at Langley what we wanted to do, and then we'd go up and spend all this time up in Washington. We worked a pretty tough schedule, actually. We'd get up kind of early in the morning and go eat breakfast, and then we were always at the NACA headquarters. Their building was right around the corner from Lafayette Square. We'd go there every morning, and we'd work all day. And we'd go to the Pentagon, spend time over at the Pentagon. We started spend time up in Germantown at the AEC on occasion, looking at nuclear rocket stuff, things like that. And we'd work till kind of late, and we'd all go out and eat. We'd all get together, and we'd all go out and eat supper. In fact, everybody, we lived together pretty much. We stayed at the same hotel. There's a kind of old flea bag called Francis Scott Key over there. It's part of Georgetown University now, I think, it's dormitory. But it was a kind of low-key place. A nice hotel, by the way. I'm not running it down, but it had no bellhop, so you carried your own baggage. Every room had a stove and a refrigerator. It had a unique air conditioning system. It had a big shaft they put blocks of ice in, and they blew air over it, and if you opened your window, it'd let air blow out of your room and keep your room cool. And it was cheap because we had per diem was very, very low back then. We didn't have a lot of money to spend. But we always went out. Restaurants, taxis are cheap in Washington, and the restaurants were fairly inexpensive, good food. So we always used to go out and eat all the time together. And then we'd come back and go back to the hotel. We'd go stop by a liquor store and get a bottle, and we'd sit around and have a few drinks and sit up and go over the day's activities with Bob and Abe Silverstein, actually, who was kind of Abe made himself the kind of #1 guy in the space program. He was director of Lewis at the time. And, so we'd go over and kick around the ideas about what we thought we wanted to do and get some feedback. And that's pretty much what went on. At the same time, we were doing all this work back at Langley on Scout, what Scout would look like, and on what the Mercury would look like. And then Max was kind of going around to the military and various other installations, kind of trying to sell the program a little bit, I believe. And so by the time the Space Act was passed and we became NASA on the 1st of October, I guess, of '58, that we'd done most of the groundwork, actually, for what NASA started doing, actually. That we started a Scout program shortly after, after we became NASA. That was one of the big funded programs. We started a big solid rocket booster program. We started some liquid rocket programs. We started the Mercury program, basically manned space program. And we were ready. By the time '58 came around, well, we were hot to trot. We were ready to go, no problem. And then shortly after that, they formed a space task group because they kind of felt it was kind of too big, or it didn't belong in a laboratory per se as part of the laboratory. There should be a separate operation, and they formed a space task group back in probably in October, November of '58. Yeah, three months later, I think we had the Mercury under contract.
Wow.
Yeah, you see, that shows you don't go out and do things like that if you don't know if you haven't done a good job of planning. We had a design, we had everything pretty well laid out, and we'd been doing some other type of testing actually in anticipation of that.